You fired the wrong man. I saw who pushed you. Everyone blamed the janitor, only a little girl dared to tell the truth. The headquarters of Crawford Industries was unusually quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that settled in after long meetings and heavier decisions. The marble staircase in the central hall reflected the soft golden lights above, polished to perfection, just like everything else in the building. Daniel Crawford was walking down those stairs slowly, one hand resting on the railing, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in a low, distracted voice about contracts and deadlines. He looked exactly as people expected a millionaire to look, dark hair neatly styled, a tailored suit sitting perfectly on his broad shoulders, blue eyes sharp even when tired. He had spent years building this company, years trusting systems, people, security. The building felt safe to him. Familiar. Controlled. He never heard the footsteps behind him. A sudden force hit his back, strong and precise, stealing his balance in an instant. The phone slipped from his hand as the world tilted violently. Daniel had time only for a sharp intake of breath before the stairs vanished beneath his feet. Pain exploded through his body as he tumbled downward, the impact knocking the air from his lungs and the light from his vision. Voices rushed in, distorted and distant. Call an ambulance. He fell. Oh my God. Daniel lay at the bottom of the staircase, dazed, his head spinning, his thoughts fractured into flashes of sound and light. Through the haze, he heard someone shouting insistently, louder than the others. It was the janitor. He pushed him. I saw it. Strong hands lifted his shoulders. Someone pressed a cloth to his head. Someone else kept repeating his name, trying to keep him conscious. Daniel wanted to speak, to say something felt wrong, but his tongue felt heavy and uncooperative. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was a blur of faces above him and, somewhere in the crowd, a small blonde girl in a red dress standing completely still, her blue eyes wide with fear. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't moved. She had seen everything. When Daniel woke up in the hospital hours later, the story had already been written for him. He was told it was an accident caused by a reckless employee. The janitor had been fired. The police had questions. The case seemed simple, clean, resolved. Daniel accepted it without protest. But somewhere deep in his mind, beneath the pain and medication, a strange unease lingered, like the echo of a truth that had not yet been spoken. Daniel woke to the steady beeping of machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic, a smell that always seemed to belong to places where people pretended to have control. His head throbbed with a dull, persistent pain, and every attempt to move sent a sharp reminder through his body that something had gone terribly wrong. For a few seconds, he lay still, staring at the white ceiling, trying to piece together how he had gotten there. A nurse noticed his eyes open and immediately stepped closer, her movements calm and practiced. She asked his name, the date, where he was. Daniel answered slowly, his voice rough, his thoughts lagging behind the questions. When she seemed satisfied, she offered a small smile and told him he was lucky. Very lucky. Later, a doctor came in with a clipboard and a careful expression. He explained the injuries in measured tones, a concussion, bruised ribs, nothing broken, but enough to require observation. Daniel listened, nodding, absorbing the words without reacting much. It all sounded distant, as if it had happened to someone else. You were pushed, the doctor added, almost casually. Security believes the janitor is responsible. He's been detained for questioning. Daniel frowned slightly. The word pushed echoed in his head, heavier than the rest. He searched his memory, but all he could recall was the sudden loss of balance and the terrifying absence of ground beneath his feet. He did not remember seeing anyone. He did not remember a face. If that's what they say, he replied quietly. By the afternoon, visitors began to arrive. Executives, assistants, lawyers, all speaking in hushed voices, all assuring him that everything was under control. Among them was the head of security, Mike Walters, standing straight and composed, his uniform immaculate. He spoke with confidence, recounting the events with certainty, explaining how he had arrived just in time, how he had seen the janitor fleeing the scene. Daniel watched him closely. Mike met his gaze without hesitation, concern written carefully across his face. "I'm just glad you're alive, sir," Mike said. "We won't let this happen again." Daniel thanked him, though something about the man's tone lingered uncomfortably. It was too smooth, too rehearsed. He dismissed the thought as paranoia brought on by pain and medication. That evening, alone in his room, Daniel stared out the window at the city lights. Everything below moved as usual, people rushing, cars stopping and starting, life continuing without pause. He should have felt relieved. Instead, a strange restlessness settled in his chest. Every time he closed his eyes, a single image surfaced, uninvited and sharp. A small girl. Blonde hair. A red dress. Standing among the chaos at the bottom of the stairs, not crying, not shouting, just watching him with an expression he could not name. He didn't know who she was or why his mind clung to her face, but the image refused to fade. Somewhere inside him, a quiet thought formed, unsettling and persistent. What if the story everyone believed was wrong? The next morning, Daniel was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions to rest, instructions he already knew he would only partially follow. The bandage around his head felt tight, a constant reminder of how quickly control could be taken away. He returned to his penthouse late in the afternoon, the silence of the space pressing down on him far more heavily than the noise of the hospital ever had. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out over the city he believed he understood. From this height, everything looked orderly, predictable, safe. And yet, only hours earlier, that same sense of safety had betrayed him. His thoughts kept circling back to the same gaps in his memory. The fall itself was a blur, but the moments before and after felt unnaturally clear. The staircase. The phone in his hand. The sudden shove. And then the voices. One voice in particular, loud and certain, accusing someone before anyone had even asked a question. That certainty bothered him. Daniel called his assistant and asked for a full timeline of the incident, not the official report, but every detail that had been overlooked. Who had been present? Who had spoken first? Who had taken control of the situation? His assistant hesitated, then promised to gather everything. Later that evening, as dusk settled in, Daniel returned to the office building for the first time since the fall. He told no one he was coming. The lobby was quieter than usual, shadows stretching across the polished floors. The staircase stood exactly where it always had, harmless in appearance, almost mocking. He walked slowly toward it, one step at a time, his hand gripping the railing more tightly than he cared to admit. That was when he noticed her. The little girl sat on a bench near the cafe, swinging her legs slightly as she waited. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a red dress. The same child from his memory. She looked up when he approached, her expression instantly changing from boredom to something closer to fear. Daniel stopped a few feet away. "You were here," he said gently, more a statement than a question. The girl nodded but didn't speak. "I saw you that night," he continued. "At the bottom of the stairs." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her small bag. "I was waiting for my mom," she said quietly. Daniel studied her face. Children, he knew, were bad liars when they were scared. What he saw in her eyes wasn't confusion or imagination. It was hesitation. Calculation. The kind that came from knowing a truth could be dangerous. "Did you see what happened?" he asked carefully. She looked past him, toward the security desk, then back at the floor. "Everyone says it was the janitor," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "That's what they say," Daniel agreed. "But that's not what I asked." Silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. The girl's breathing quickened slightly. "I don't want my mom to get in trouble," she whispered. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "No one will," he said quietly. "I promise." She looked up then, searching his face with a seriousness that didn't belong to someone so young. Her blue eyes met his, and in that moment, Daniel knew the truth was already standing in front of him, waiting to be acknowledged. "I saw who pushed you," she said softly. Daniel didn't ask her to repeat herself. Somehow, he already knew that everything he believed about that night was about to collapse. Daniel felt the weight of her words settle slowly, like dust after a collapse. He didn't rush her, didn't reach out, didn't speak right away. Years of negotiating deals had taught him when silence was more powerful than pressure, and this was one of those moments. The girl's small shoulders were tense, her body angled slightly away from him as if she were already preparing to run. "What did you see?" he asked at last, keeping his voice low and steady. She hesitated, her fingers twisting the fabric of her red dress. Around them, the lobby continued its quiet routine. The cafe machine hissed softly, footsteps echoed in the distance, and somewhere a phone rang. Ordinary life moved on, completely unaware that the truth was standing in the open. "I was drawing," the girl said finally. "I always sit there when my mom works late." Daniel followed her gaze to the bench near the stairs. He nodded, encouraging her without interrupting. "You were on the phone," she continued. "You were walking down. And then." She stopped, swallowing hard. "The guard came from behind you." Daniel's grip tightened on the railing beside him, though his face remained calm. "Which guard?" She lifted her hand slowly and pointed, not dramatically, not accusingly, just clearly. Her finger aimed toward the security desk at the far end of the lobby, where Mike Walters stood talking to another employee, laughing easily, completely at ease. "That one," she said. "He looked around first. Then he pushed you." The world seemed to narrow for Daniel, sounds fading into a dull background hum. He watched Mike for a moment, studying the man's posture, the relaxed confidence, the absence of concern. It was the same man who had stood at his hospital bed and spoken with such certainty, such practiced sympathy. "Did anyone else see it?" Daniel asked. The girl shook her head. "I don't think so." He yelled right away. Everyone looked at the janitor. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, feeling a surge of anger he forced himself to contain. The pieces began to align with disturbing clarity. The speed of the accusation. The cameras that had supposedly malfunctioned. The eagerness with which blame had been assigned. "Why didn't you say anything before?" he asked, not as an accusation, but with genuine concern. Tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them back bravely. "My mom said not to cause problems," she whispered. "She said powerful people don't like it when kids talk." Daniel felt the sting of those words more sharply than the fall itself. He crouched slightly so they were closer to eye level, careful not to tower over her. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "And you won't be in trouble. I give you my word." She searched his face for a long moment, as if weighing whether his promise was worth believing. Finally, she nodded, though fear still lingered in her eyes. Behind them, footsteps approached. Daniel straightened slowly, his expression unreadable as Mike Walters called out his name with apparent surprise. "Mr. Crawford, you shouldn't be here yet," Mike said. "You need rest." Daniel turned to face him, his blue eyes sharp and focused despite the bandage on his head. "I need answers," he replied calmly. "And I think it's time we reviewed the security footage again. All of it." For the first time, something flickered across Mike's face. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but Daniel caught it. Fear. The girl stepped back, instinctively moving closer to the cafe door where her mother worked. Daniel noticed and placed himself slightly between her and the guard without making it obvious. "Nothing to worry about," Daniel said evenly. "Unless, of course, there is." And in that moment, the truth, once fragile and hidden, began to feel unstoppable. Daniel did not confront Mike immediately. He had learned long ago that truth revealed too quickly often found ways to escape. Instead, he returned to his office and closed the door, letting the familiar space ground him while his thoughts moved rapidly beneath the surface. The girl's words echoed in his mind with unsettling clarity, not dramatic, not exaggerated, but precise in a way that could not be rehearsed. He called his legal advisor first, then the head of internal compliance, carefully choosing his words. He did not accuse. He asked questions. Very specific ones. About camera blind spots. About maintenance logs. About backup servers that were supposedly overridden. Each question tightened the invisible net he was casting. Within an hour, the mood in the building shifted. Quiet messages were sent. Doors closed softly. People who had once moved freely through corridors now walked more carefully, glancing over their shoulders without fully understanding why. Mike Walters continued his shift at the security desk, his posture confident, his smile unchanged, but Daniel noticed how often he checked his watch. In a secure conference room, technicians began pulling archived footage from systems no one had bothered to check the first time. Files loaded slowly, one by one, until the staircase appeared on the screen from an angle Daniel had not seen before. The image was grainy, partially obstructed, but it was enough. Daniel leaned forward, his jaw tightening. There he was, on the phone, walking down the stairs. Then a shadow moved behind him. A figure paused, looked around, and stepped closer. The push was quick, controlled, almost professional. The phone flew from Daniel's hand. His body disappeared from the frame as he fell. Silence filled the room. No janitor entered the frame. No accident occurred. Only intent. Daniel exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried both relief and rage. He felt relief because the unease that had followed him since the hospital finally had a shape. He felt rage because someone he trusted had used that trust as a weapon. "Lock the footage," Daniel said quietly. "And call the police." Meanwhile, downstairs, the girl sat with her mother at a small table near the cafe, her legs tucked beneath the chair. She kept glancing toward the security desk, her stomach tight with worry. Her mother noticed and placed a gentle hand over hers. "You did what you thought was right," she said softly. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." The words helped, but they didn't erase the fear. The girl knew she had pointed at someone powerful, someone who wore authority like armor. She wondered if she had been foolish to speak at all. When two police officers entered the lobby and approached the security desk, the room seemed to hold its breath. Mike's smile faltered as they spoke quietly to him. He laughed once, too loudly, then stopped when one of the officers asked him to step away from the desk. Daniel watched from the upper level, his hand resting on the railing, his expression unreadable. Mike protested at first, his voice rising, insisting on a misunderstanding, on a mistake. But when the officers mentioned video evidence, the color drained from his face. The confidence he had worn so easily began to crack. As he was escorted away, his eyes flicked across the lobby and landed briefly on the girl. There was no anger in his gaze, only calculation, quickly masked by panic. The girl shrank back instinctively, but Daniel moved closer, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. She looked up at him, surprised. "You're safe," he said quietly. "You did exactly what you should have done." Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from the release of something she had been holding inside since the night of the fall. She nodded, unable to speak. That evening, the janitor was cleared of all accusations. Daniel made sure of it personally. An apology was issued, not through lawyers or statements, but face to face. As night fell over the city, Daniel stood alone in his office, looking out at the lights below. His body still ached, his head still throbbed, but something inside him felt steadier than it had in days. The truth had been fragile in a child's hands. And because she had dared to speak, it had survived. The aftermath did not unfold with the drama Daniel had once imagined justice would require. There were no public arrests in handcuffs flashing under cameras, no loud statements made for the press. Instead, everything moved with quiet precision, as if the building itself were correcting a mistake it had allowed to happen. Mike Walters was suspended immediately, then formally charged once the evidence was reviewed by the authorities. His confident presence vanished from the lobby overnight, replaced by an uncomfortable absence that no one spoke about openly. Daniel spent that day in meetings that felt different from any he had led before. These were not about profits or acquisitions, but about accountability, about how easily a lie could become truth when spoken loudly enough by the right person. He listened more than he talked, his blue eyes sharp but thoughtful, his questions cutting straight to the uncomfortable places people preferred to avoid. Every few hours, his attention returned to the same thought, the girl. She had gone home with her mother shortly after the police arrived, slipping out quietly, unnoticed by most. Daniel made sure they were escorted safely, not by security in uniform, but by someone discreet, someone who wouldn't draw attention. He understood now how fragile courage could be after it was spent. That evening, Daniel asked for her name. "Emily," his assistant said. "Her mother works at the cafe. She's been there for years." The simplicity of that information struck him. Emily. Not a symbol. Not a headline. Just a child who had been in the wrong place at the right moment and had chosen not to look away. The next day, Daniel requested a private meeting with the janitor who had been accused. The man arrived nervous, shoulders hunched, eyes lowered, clearly expecting another humiliation rather than an apology. Daniel stood when he entered, ignoring the ache in his ribs, and extended his hand. "I believed a lie," Daniel said plainly. "And it cost you." The janitor stared at him, stunned, before slowly shaking his hand. No speech followed, no dramatic forgiveness, only a quiet understanding between two men who had seen how quickly lives could be damaged by assumptions. Daniel reinstated him immediately, with compensation and a formal apology recorded in his file, but more importantly, spoken aloud. Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself standing in the lobby again, watching people move through the space as they always had. The staircase no longer felt neutral. It felt like a reminder. Emily and her mother returned near closing time. The girl wore the same red dress, though now it looked less bright somehow, as if it carried the memory of fear stitched into its seams. She held her mother's hand tightly, her posture cautious but upright. Daniel approached them slowly, careful not to overwhelm her. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said. And to tell you that what you did mattered more than you probably realize." Emily looked up at him, searching his face with the same seriousness he had seen before. "Is the man gone?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. "And the man who was blamed is safe." She nodded, absorbing the information quietly. "You were very brave," Daniel added. Emily shook her head. "I was just honest." The answer stayed with him. As they left, Daniel watched the two figures disappear into the evening crowd, feeling a weight settle in his chest that had nothing to do with injury. He realized that power had never truly been about control or authority. It had been about listening. And for the first time in a very long while, Daniel felt grateful that someone smaller, quieter, and far more honest than him had been willing to use her voice when he could not. The weeks that followed settled into an unfamiliar calm, the kind that comes after something fragile has survived being broken. Daniel returned to his routine, but it no longer fit him the same way. Meetings felt louder, decisions heavier, and every confident statement now carried a silent question beneath it. Who is being heard, and who is being ignored? Changes began quietly at first. Security protocols were rewritten, not only to prevent intrusions but to prevent unchecked authority. Oversight committees were formed. Anonymous reporting channels were introduced, ones that didn't care about rank or job title. Daniel insisted on reading every report himself during the first weeks, even when his advisors suggested delegating. He didn't. The staircase was reopened after a brief renovation, but something about it remained different. Employees slowed as they passed it, voices lowered instinctively. No one joked there anymore. Emily stayed in Daniel's thoughts more often than he expected. Not as a symbol or a reminder of danger, but as a measure. When faced with a decision, he found himself asking whether it would protect someone like her or silence them. The answer mattered more than it ever had before. One afternoon, Daniel invited Emily and her mother to his office, not for publicity or ceremony, but because he believed some conversations deserved space and privacy. Emily arrived holding her mother's hand, her red dress replaced by a simple sweater, her posture cautious but steady. She looked around the office with quiet curiosity, taking in the tall windows and city beyond them without awe. "I wanted to tell you something," Daniel said after they sat down. "You changed the way this place works." Emily frowned slightly. "I didn't mean to change anything," she said. "I know," Daniel replied. "That's why it matters." He explained the new policies in simple terms, not to impress her, but to be honest. He told her about the janitor's reinstatement, about the apology that had been accepted with dignity rather than gratitude, about the security guard who no longer held power over others. Emily listened carefully, absorbing each detail, then nodded once as if placing them in order inside her mind. "That's good," she said. "People shouldn't be scared to tell the truth." Her mother watched her daughter with quiet amazement, as if still adjusting to the fact that the child she had once urged to stay silent had taught her something essential. Before they left, Daniel handed Emily a small envelope. Inside was a letter, written in his own hand, thanking her for her honesty and courage, and offering support for her education should she ever want it. No obligations. No expectations. Emily didn't open it right away. She held it carefully, then looked up at him. "I didn't do it for this," she said. "I know," Daniel replied. "That's why it's not a reward. It's a door." That evening, after they were gone, Daniel stood alone in his office as the sun dipped behind the skyline. His body still bore traces of the fall, a dull ache that reminded him of how close he had come to never hearing Emily's voice at all. He realized then that survival hadn't been the greatest gift he'd been given. Truth had been. And it had come from the one person everyone else had been willing to overlook. Time did what it always did, moving forward without asking permission, but it left its marks in careful, deliberate ways. Months passed, then a year, and the story that once felt sharp and immediate settled into something quieter, something that lived beneath the surface rather than on it. Daniel healed fully, though the memory of the fall never truly faded. It followed him not as fear, but as awareness. Crawford Industries became known for something unexpected. Not just innovation or profit, but for transparency. Employees spoke more freely. Complaints were investigated without assumptions. Power no longer moved in one direction. Daniel watched these changes with a sense of responsibility he had never carried before, knowing exactly how easily the truth could still be lost if people stopped listening. Emily grew too. She was taller now, her voice steadier, her curiosity sharper. She visited the building occasionally with her mother, not as a reminder of the past, but as a quiet presence that felt strangely grounding. People who recognized her treated her kindly, though she remained the same, observant and thoughtful, uninterested in attention. One afternoon, Daniel met her again in the lobby, near the staircase that had once nearly ended his life. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, turning the marble steps warm and bright. Emily stopped there for a moment, then looked up at him. "Do you still remember?" she asked. "I remember every day," Daniel replied honestly. She nodded, satisfied with the answer. "Good," she said. "Then it wasn't for nothing." They stood there in silence, not awkward, not heavy, just present. Before leaving, Emily slipped her hand into her mother's and turned back once more. "Thank you for listening," she said. Daniel watched them walk away, the sound of their footsteps fading into the quiet rhythm of the building. He felt a sense of completion settle in, not because the story had ended, but because it had found its meaning. Later that evening, Daniel sat alone in his office and opened the letter Emily had once written him in uneven handwriting, the one she had given him weeks after the incident. He read it slowly, though he knew every word by heart. It didn't speak of bravery or justice. It spoke of truth, and how frightening and necessary it could be. He placed the letter back in its drawer and closed it carefully. Some truths arrived loudly, demanded attention, and then disappeared. Others came quietly, spoken by a child who refused to look away. Those were the ones that changed everything.